The porch light was still yellow. That was the first thing Eli noticed as the taxi pulled away and left him standing at the end of a gravel driveway he hadn't walked in 9 years. The same warm, moth-battered yellow bulb his mother used to leave burning for him when he snuck in past curfew. Back when curfew was a thing that mattered. Back when this town was the only world he knew. He didn't expect to cry at a porch light. But grief has a way of hiding in the smallest, dumbest things, and Eli stood there in the cooling August air with his suitcase handle biting into his palm, blinking hard, telling himself it was just the dust from the road. His father had died on a Tuesday. Eli had been in a client meeting in the city, 300 miles away, reviewing quarterly projections, when his sister's text came through, "Dad's gone. Come home." 2 words that undid 9 years of very carefully not coming home. He hadn't planned to see anyone. He'd planned to bury his father, sit through the reception, endure the casseroles and the sad-eyed aunts, and leave before the town could ask him too many questions about the life he'd built somewhere else. A life that didn't quite fit here, though he'd never said exactly why. Which was why, when he turned to walk up the driveway and a voice behind him said his name like it still belonged in this man's mouth, Eli's whole body went still. Eli Carter. Not a question. A fact, spoken low, like the speaker was testing whether the word still worked after all this time. Eli turned, and the years folded up like a map he didn't need anymore, because there, leaning against a truck that hadn't existed the last time Eli saw him, was Micah Reyes, taller now, broader through the shoulders, a short beard where there used to be nothing but a boy's stubborn jaw, but unmistakably, achingly the same person who used to climb through Eli's bedroom window on summer nights, just so they wouldn't have to stop talking. "Micah." It came out rougher than Eli meant it to. "Heard about your dad." Micah pushed off the truck and closed the distance between them slowly, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. "I'm sorry, man. He was good to me. Taught me how to change my first tire in your garage. You remember that? He made you do it 3 times because you kept skipping the lug pattern. He made you do it 4 times. Micah's mouth curved, and there it was, the smile Eli used to fall asleep thinking about in a dorm room 2 states away, the smile he'd told himself, for 9 years, that he'd successfully forgotten. He had not successfully forgotten it. "You didn't have to come out here," Eli said, "because it was easier than saying anything true. I live 2 houses down still. Kind of hard to miss a taxi pulling up to the Carter place at 10 at night." Micah studied him for a second too long. "You look tired. It's been a long day. It's been a long 9 years." Micah said it gently, no accusation in it, but Eli felt it land somewhere under his ribs anyway. "Your sister said you weren't answering when she called to tell you the service time. She called me instead. Guess I'm still the emergency contact." That surprised a short, unwilling laugh out of Eli. "You're not on any of my forms. I'm on the town's forms." "Everybody just assumes if something's wrong with Eli Carter," asked Micah Reyes. He shrugged like it wasn't a confession, though it kind of was. "Funeral's Thursday, 10 a.m., at the Baptist church. Reception after, at your sister's." "I know. She sent me 40 texts. You want help carrying that in?" Micah nodded at the suitcase, and Eli almost said no out of some reflex he didn't examine too closely, and then didn't, because the truth was his hands were shaking a little and he didn't want to be alone in his father's dark house just yet. They walked up the driveway together, and it was such a small thing. 2 men crossing 40 feet of gravel, but Eli felt every step of it in a way he hadn't felt anything in years. The house smelled like his father's coffee and old cedar, and something underneath that Eli couldn't name, something like absence already settling into the walls. Micah set the suitcase down inside the door and didn't leave right away, hovering in the entryway with his hands in his pockets, looking around at the pictures on the wall. Eli at 8, missing his front teeth. Eli at 16, graduation gown too big for him. Eli and Micah at 17, arms slung around each other's shoulders at the county fair. Both of them squinting into the sun and laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. "He kept that one up," Micah said quietly, looking at the fair photo. "All this time." "Yeah." Eli's throat felt tight. "He kept a lot of things up." Micah turned to look at him then, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was so full of 9 unspoken years that Eli almost couldn't stand under the weight of it. He remembered, suddenly and completely, the last night he'd seen Micah before he left for college. The 2 of them sitting on the tailgate of Micah's old truck down by the river, the crickets loud, Micah's knee pressed against his, neither of them moving away from it. Both of them so carefully not saying the thing that was sitting right there between them, thick as summer heat. He remembered how close their faces had gotten. He remembered pulling back first. He remembered telling himself it was because he was scared, and it was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, and he'd spent 9 years since then not looking directly at the rest of it. I should let you get some rest, Micah said finally, breaking whatever had built up in the quiet. But Eli, he stopped at the door, hand on the frame, and turned back. I'm real glad you're home. Even like this. I missed you. 3 words. Eli had heard them 1,000 times in 1,000 contexts, and none of them had ever hit him the way these 3 did. Standing in his dead father's front hall at 10 at night, with grief sitting in his chest like a stone. I missed you too, Eli said, and it was the truest thing he'd said all day. Micah nodded once, like he was filing that answer away somewhere careful, and then he was gone, his truck's headlights sweeping across the ceiling as he backed out of the driveway, and Eli stood alone in the house he grew up in, feeling 9 years of distance collapse into something that felt dangerously, unbearably close. He didn't sleep well. He hadn't expected to. His father's house at night was full of sounds he'd forgotten. The specific creak of the 3rd stair, the hum of the refrigerator that had needed replacing a decade ago and never was. But it wasn't only grief keeping him up. It was the memory of Micah's face in the doorway, the particular way he'd said I missed you, low and unguarded, like the words had been sitting behind his teeth for years waiting for the chance. Eli had built an entire life around not thinking about Micah Reyes. He had an apartment in the city with clean lines and no photographs on the walls. He had a job that kept him busy 60 hours a week. He had, on occasion, dated men. Careful, contained relationships that never asked too much of him and never gave too much back. None of them had lasted. None of them had made him feel the way one dumb, achingly ordinary conversation on a porch had made him feel tonight. He got up before 6, unable to lie in the dark any longer, and made coffee in his father's ancient percolator, and was standing on the back porch watching the sun come up over the tree line when he heard footsteps on gravel and looked over to see Micah, in running shorts and a faded college shirt, slowing to a stop at the fence line between their yards, breathing hard, sweat darkening his collar. You're up early, Micah called. Never went asleep, really? Micah hesitated, then vaulted the low fence with an ease that made something in Eli's chest tighten, and crossed the yard, and Eli found himself pouring a second cup of coffee without being asked, the way he used to when they were 17, and this was just what mornings looked like. You didn't have to do that, Micah said, taking the mug anyway, his fingers brushing Eli's for half a second longer than the exchange required. Old habit, Eli said, and meant it as a joke, and it didn't quite land as one. They sat on the porch steps together, shoulders almost touching, watching the light change over the fields behind the house, and for a little while neither of them said anything at all. It should have been awkward. 9 years of silence should have made the quiet feel foreign. Instead, it felt like something Eli had been missing without knowing its name. The specific, easy comfort of sitting beside a person who had known him before he learned to hide. How long are you staying? Micah asked eventually, not looking at him, eyes on the horizon. I don't know yet. There's the estate to deal with. The house. Eli turned the mug in his hands. My sister thinks I should sell it. Do you want to? I don't know that either. It was, Eli realized, the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in months. I haven't figured out what I want in a long time, Micah. Micah was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped into something more careful, more deliberate, like he was choosing each word off a shelf he didn't often reach for. You left because of me, didn't you? It wasn't an accusation. It was barely even a question, but it landed in Eli's chest like something breaking loose after being wedged in place for 9 years, and he found he couldn't answer right away because the truth of it had teeth, and he wasn't sure he was ready to feel them. I left because I was a coward, Eli said finally, staring out at the field instead of at Micah's face. That's not the same thing as because of you. That's because of me. Eli, I should go start on my dad's paperwork, Eli said, standing too fast, coffee sloshing over his knuckles, and if Micah noticed the retreat for exactly what it was, he was kind enough not to say so. But as Eli reached the door, Micah's voice caught him one more time. I'm not going anywhere this time. Whatever this week turns into. A pause, weighted with everything neither of them was saying. I just wanted you to know that. Eli stood with his hand on the screen door, his back to the yard, his heart doing something complicated and loud in his chest, and did not turn around, because he was afraid of what his face would give away if he did. "Okay," he said, so quiet he wasn't sure Micah heard it. But Micah did, and long after Eli had gone inside, he stood at the fence line a while longer, watching the porch door swing shut, feeling 9 years of careful distance start, very slowly, to come apart. Eli spent the morning drowning in paperwork he didn't understand. Insurance forms. While his father's lawyer kept calling straightforward in a tone that suggested it was anything but a stack of unpaid bills that made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with money. His sister, Dana, arrived around noon with a casserole dish and an expression that said she'd already heard about the porch light, the coffee, the truck parked at the fence line at 6 in the morning. "Micah Reyes," she said, not even bothering to make it a question, setting the dish down on the kitchen counter with a thud. "I leave for 2 years and come back to find you two doing the whole domestic thing again." "We had coffee, Dana." "Uh-huh." She opened the fridge, rearranged nothing in particular, closed it again, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood, fidgeting with things that didn't need fixing so she wouldn't have to look at people directly when she said something that mattered. "You know he asked about you. Every time I came through town. Every single time. Eli, for 9 years. How's your brother doing?" Like clockwork. Eli set down the pen he'd been holding. "He never called me. Would you have picked up?" The question sat between them, ugly and true, and Eli didn't have an answer for it, because he honestly didn't know. There had been nights in the city, plenty of them, when he'd scrolled to Micah's name in his contacts, thumb hovering, and put the phone down without dialing, telling himself it was for the best, telling himself distance was a kindness he was doing both of them. "It wasn't that simple," he said finally. Dana softened, came around the counter, and put a hand on his shoulder, the same gesture their mother used to make, before she passed, back when Eli was small enough that a hand on the shoulder could fix almost anything. "I know it wasn't. I was here, remember? I saw what happened between you two before you left. I saw what it did to you." Eli's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago. Was it, though?" Dana studied him with the particular unflinching honesty only a sibling could get away with. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like maybe 9 years didn't change a whole lot." He didn't see Micah again until the funeral itself, 2 days later, and even then it was only a glimpse across the crowded church. Micah in a dark suit that didn't quite fit right in the shoulders, standing near the back with his mother, his eyes finding Eli's across the room during the second hymn, and holding there, steady, present, saying without words, "I'm here, whatever you need." The service was a blur of casseroles and condolences and Eli's own voice, thin and strange, reading a eulogy he'd written on the plane. He got through it without crying, which felt like both an achievement and a failure, like he'd protected something at the cost of something else. It was Micah who found him afterward, out behind the church where the gravel lot met the tree line, Eli's tie loosened, his jacket slung over one shoulder, staring at nothing in particular. "You did good in there," Micah said, coming to stand beside him, close enough that Eli could feel the warmth radiating off him in the August heat. "I don't remember most of it. That's usually how it goes." Micah was quiet for a moment. "My dad's funeral, I don't remember a single word I said. Just remember your dad's hand on my shoulder afterward. He didn't say anything. Just stood there with me for like 10 minutes. Eli looked over at him, surprised. He'd forgotten, or maybe never fully known, how present his father had been in Micah's life during the years Eli was away. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know," Micah said, and it wasn't unkind, just factual. A door left slightly open. "Your dad and I got close after you left. I think." He stopped, seemed to reconsider, started again. "I think we were both missing the same person, and it gave us something to talk about." The admission hit Eli somewhere soft and unguarded. He thought of his father, alone in that house for 9 years, and Micah 2 doors down, both of them orbiting the absence Eli had left behind, and something in his chest cracked open in a way grief hadn't quite managed to do on its own. "I'm sorry," Eli said, and it came out cracked. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. For either of you." "Hey." Micah turned to face him fully now, and there was nothing careful left in his expression, just something raw and honest that Eli hadn't let himself see in 9 years. "You don't have to apologize to me. You had your reasons. I know I gave you plenty of them." "You didn't." "I did, Eli." Micah's voice dropped, rough at the edges. You think I don't remember what I said to you? Junior year, when Danny Ostrowski came out, and half the football team wouldn't sit with him at lunch, and he shook his head, jaw tight. I was 17 and terrified of my own shadow, and I said things I've spent a decade regretting. I know that's part of why you left the way you did. Quiet. Fast. Without really saying goodbye. Eli's throat closed up. He hadn't expected Micah to bring it up here. Now, in a gravel parking lot with his father's casket freshly lowered into the ground a mile away. But some part of him had been waiting 9 years for exactly this conversation. And now that it was here, he found he couldn't look away from it. You weren't wrong to be scared, Eli said quietly. I was scared too. I just didn't say it out loud the way you did. That doesn't make it okay. No. But it makes it human. Eli exhaled, long and unsteady. You were a kid who grew up in a house where your dad quoted scripture at the dinner table like it was a threat. I know what that did to you. I watched it happen for years before I ever left. Micah's eyes were bright, wet at the corners, and he blinked hard against it, looking away toward the tree line. I changed, Eli. It took me longer than it should have, and I'm not proud of who I was at 17, but I'm not him anymore. I want you to know that. Really know it. Not just hear it. I believe you, Eli said, and found that he meant it completely. They stood there together in the heat, close enough now that their shoulders were almost touching, the church bell tolling somewhere behind them, marking an hour that felt like it belonged to a different, gentler world than the one they'd both grown up navigating separately. Come by the river tonight, Micah said finally, so quiet it was almost lost under the bell. Same spot. If you want to. No pressure. I don't want to say goodbye to you again without actually talking this time. Really talking. Eli looked at him for a long moment, at the man Micah had become, steadier and softer and more honest than the boy Eli had left behind, at the particular hope sitting carefully behind his eyes, hope he was clearly trying hard not to show too much of. Okay, Eli said. Tonight. The river hadn't changed. That was the strange, disorienting thing Eli kept circling back to as he picked his way down the familiar path through the trees, flashlight bobbing in his hand. The August night thick with cicadas and the smell of warm water and cut grass. 9 years, and the world had rearranged itself so completely around him. New job, new city, new version of himself he'd built brick by careful brick. And yet this exact bend in the water, this exact stretch of bank, sat waiting like it had never once considered moving on without him. Micah was already there when Eli came through the last line of trees, sitting on the tailgate of his truck exactly the way he used to, exactly the way Eli remembered from 100 nights just like this one, except none of those nights had carried the particular weight this one did. 2 lanterns sat glowing on the tailgate beside him, casting soft gold light across the water. You brought lanterns, Eli said, coming to a stop a few feet away, something in his chest going tight and warm at the sight. Didn't want you breaking your ankle in the dark. Wouldn't want you leaving town again with a cast on top of everything else. Micah's smile was easy, but his eyes were careful, watching Eli's face for something. You came. I said I would. You also said that about a lot of things, once. It wasn't cruel, the way he said it, just honest, a small scar he was showing on purpose. Sit down. I'm not going to bite. Eli climbed up onto the tailgate beside him, close enough that their knees almost touched, the way they used to sit, the way Eli's body seemed to remember even when his mind had spent 9 years trying to forget the specifics. The river moved past them, dark and steady, catching threads of moonlight on its surface. For a while, neither of them spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was, Eli thought, maybe the most comfortable silence he'd sat in for nearly a decade. No meetings to prepare for, no small talk to perform, just the water and the crickets and Micah's shoulder a few careful inches from his own. I used to come out here a lot. After you left, Micah said eventually, voice low, eyes on the water. Sat right here, most nights that first summer. I kept thinking if I sat here long enough I'd figure out what I should have said to you before you got on that plane. Never did figure it out. Guess I'm still working on it. You don't have to have the perfect thing to say. I know. But I want to say it right this time. Micah turned to look at him, and in the lantern light his face was open in a way Eli hadn't seen since they were 17, before either of them had learned to build walls. Eli, I loved you. Back then. I think some part of me knew it even before I had the words for what that meant, and I was too scared of what that would cost me, with my dad, with this town, with everything I thought my life was supposed to look like, to ever say it out loud. So instead I said stupid, cowardly things about other people, and I let you believe I was someone I wasn't, and you left because staying here meant loving someone who couldn't love you back in the open. I know that now. I've known it for years. Eli's heart was pounding so hard, he was sure Micah could hear it over the river. Micah, let me finish. Please. Micah's hands were laced together in his lap, knuckles pale with how tightly he was holding on to himself. I'm not 17 anymore. I spent years figuring out who I actually am, away from what my dad wanted, away from what this town expected. I came out to my mom 4 years ago. She cried, but not for the reason I was scared of. She cried because she said she'd known for years and had been waiting for me to feel safe enough to tell her. My dad and I don't talk much anymore, and honestly, I've made my peace with that. I'm not scared the way I used to be. His voice caught. I never stopped thinking about you. Not one day, in 9 years. And I know that might not mean anything to you now. I know you built a whole life somewhere else, and maybe there's someone in that life. And if there is, I'll shut up right now, and we can just be friends who missed each other, and that'll be enough. But I needed you to know. Before I lost the nerve again. The night had gone very quiet. Or maybe it was just that Eli couldn't hear anything except the sound of his own pulse and the particular, terrifying honesty sitting in the air between them. He thought of the city, the apartment with no photographs, the careful relationships that had never once made him feel like this, like the ground was shifting and he wanted, badly, to let it. There's no one, Eli said, his voice barely above the sound of the water. There hasn't been anyone. Not really. Not anyone who made me feel like. He stopped, throat working. Micah, I left because I was in love with you too, and I didn't know how to survive staying somewhere that felt like it would never let either of us be honest about that. I told myself it was easier to be far away and lonely than close by and hiding. And it was easier for a while. But it was never actually easier. It just hurt in a quieter way. Micah's breath caught audibly. You're saying? I'm saying I never stopped either. Eli's eyes burned, and he let them, for the first time and longer than he could remember. 9 years, Micah. 9 years, and I still knew exactly what your voice sounded like saying my name. Micah reached over slowly, giving Eli every chance to pull away, and took his hand. Just that. Just fingers lacing together on the tailgate of an old truck by a river that had watched them grow up separately and was now, somehow, watching them find their way back. And Eli let him, turned his palm up to meet it, held on like something in him had been waiting 9 years for exactly this. Can I? Micah started, voice rough, eyes flicking briefly to Eli's mouth and back up. So much hope and fear tangled together in his expression that it made Eli's chest ache. Yeah, Eli breathed, before he could finish the question. Yeah, you can. Micah leaned in slowly, giving him every last second to change his mind, and Eli didn't move away. Leaned in to meet him instead, and when their lips finally touched it was soft and searching and impossibly gentle. 9 years of longing distilled into something so quiet it barely made a sound over the river. Micah's hand coming up to rest against the side of Eli's face like he was something worth being careful with. When they finally pulled back, foreheads still resting together, both of them breathing unsteadily, Micah let out a laugh that was half disbelief and half pure relief. I've been waiting to do that since I was 17 years old. Took you long enough, Eli murmured, and felt Micah's smile against his skin. They stayed out there a long time after that, tangled together on the tailgate, talking in the low, unhurried way of two people who finally had nowhere else they needed to be, the lanterns burning down slow beside them, the river carrying everything unspoken quietly out toward the dark. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Eli knew that even as he sat there, Micah's arm warm around his shoulders, his own head tucked against Micah's collarbone. There was still a house to sell, or not sell. A city apartment with his name on the lease. A life he'd have to figure out how to fold into this one, or this one into that. 9 years didn't unmake themselves in a single night by a river, however much Eli wished they could. But for the first time since he'd stepped off that plane, none of that felt like something to be afraid of. Eli woke the next morning to sunlight cutting gold stripes across his childhood bedroom ceiling and, for one disoriented moment, forgot every hard thing that had brought him back to this house. Then it came rushing back all at once. His father, the funeral, the river, Micah's mouth against his. And he lay there a long moment just breathing, half convinced he'd dreamed the whole thing, until he reached for his phone and found a text waiting. Micah, still thinking about last night. That a problem? Eli smiled at the ceiling like an idiot before he could stop himself. Eli, not a problem. Come over. I'll make breakfast. Micah, you're cooking or your dad's old percolator coffee? Eli, both. Don't push your luck. He was still smiling when he came downstairs to find Dana already in the kitchen, going through a box of their father's old files with the particular efficiency she brought to everything. And one look at Eli's face made her set the folder down entirely. Oh no, she said, delighted. You went to the river. Dana, you went to the river, Eli Carter, and something happened, and you're standing there grinning like you're 16 again. So don't you dare tell me nothing happened. She crossed her arms, triumphant. I called it. I called it years ago. I told Mom before she passed. I said, those two are going to figure it out eventually. They're too stubborn not to. Eli felt heat crawl up his neck. It's complicated. It's always complicated with you two. Doesn't mean it's not also simple. Dana's teasing softened into something more careful. I'm happy for you. I mean that. But Eli, what happens when the estate's settled and you have to go back to the city? Have you two talked about that part? Or did you skip straight to the kissing? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water, rings spreading out from it, and Eli realized with a sinking feeling that he hadn't thought about it at all. Not once. Not sitting on that tailgate with Micah's hand in his. Not walking home afterward with his heart still racing. He'd let himself have exactly one perfect night without letting the real world back in. We'll figure it out, he said, with more confidence than he felt. Dana gave him a look that said she wasn't convinced, but she let it go, because that was mostly how their family operated, say the hard thing once, plainly, and then let each other sit with it. Micah showed up an hour later smelling like cut grass and sunscreen, having apparently mowed his mother's lawn before coming over, and the easy domesticity of it. Him leaning against the kitchen counter while Eli flipped eggs, Dana pretending very hard not to watch them both, with barely restrained delight, felt so natural that Eli almost let himself forget the conversation from that morning entirely. Almost. Can we talk? Eli asked, once Dana had taken her coffee and, with theatrical subtlety, retreated to the back porch to check on the garden, a garden that hadn't been tended in years. Micah's face shifted, some of the light going out of it, replaced by careful attention. That's usually not a good sentence. It's not bad. Eli set down the spatula, wiped his hands on a dish towel he didn't need to wipe them on, stalling. I go back to the city in 10 days. I have a job there. A whole life, actually, that doesn't know anything about what happened last night. I know. Micah's voice was quiet, steady, like he'd already thought this through more than Eli had. I'm not stupid, Eli. I know this isn't as simple as one good night by the river fixing 9 years. So what do we do? I don't know yet. Micah reached out, took Eli's hand across the counter, thumb brushing slow over his knuckles. But I know I'm not letting you disappear again without at least trying to figure it out. I've spent 9 years wondering what I should have said to you. I'm not doing that again. Whatever we decide it together, out loud, not in our own heads for a decade. It should have reassured Eli more than it did. Instead, a small, familiar coldness crept into his chest, the same instinct that had once sent him running to a college 3 states away rather than stay and risk exactly this kind of vulnerability. He recognized it for what it was, even as he felt it start to take hold. Fear, old and practiced, dressed up as practicality. What if it doesn't work? Eli asked, quieter now. What if we try, and it falls apart, and I lose you again, except this time I actually know what I'm losing? Micah's grip on his hand tightened. Then it'll hurt. A lot. I won't pretend it wouldn't. His eyes held Eli's, unflinching. But I'd rather hurt from trying than spend another 9 years hurting from not knowing. Wouldn't you? Eli didn't have an answer ready. He wanted to say yes, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised him, but some old, tired part of him was already calculating exit routes, already building the careful distance he knew how to build so well. He didn't get the chance to say anything at all, because that was the exact moment his phone buzzed on the counter, his boss's name flashing across the screen, a name that meant deadlines and quarterly reports, and the entire orderly life waiting for him 300 miles away, and Eli watched something flicker across Micah's face as he glanced down at it too. You should get that, Micah said, releasing his hand, stepping back half a pace, and just like that, 9 years of careful distance found the smallest crack to slip back through. The call from Eli's boss turned into 45 minutes of quarterly projections and a client crisis that apparently could not wait until Monday. And by the time Eli hung up, phone hot against his ear, Micah had already gone, a note on the counter in his familiar cramped handwriting. Didn't want to interrupt. Come find me when you're free. Eli told himself it was fine. He told himself a lot of things over the next few days, actually, and most of them were some version of fine, a word that had never once, in the whole of Eli's life, meant what it claimed to mean. The trouble was the estate. It ate every spare hour Eli had, in ways he hadn't anticipated. His father, it turned out, had let several things slide in his final year that Eli hadn't known about. A second mortgage taken out to cover medical bills, a stack of past due notices tucked in a drawer like his father had been too proud or too tired to deal with them. Every day brought a new fire that needed putting out, and every fire pulled Eli further from the version of himself who'd sat on that tailgate believing, for one golden night, that everything might actually be simple. He saw Micah in pieces after that. A wave across the yard, a text exchange between phone calls with the bank, one rushed dinner that got interrupted twice by Eli's phone before Micah finally, gently, suggested they just reschedule. Each small retreat felt reasonable in the moment. Stacked together, they built something that looked, from the outside, exactly like the distance Eli had once put an entire country between them to create. You're doing the thing, Dana said one evening, finding Eli hunched over his father's old desk at 11 p.m., surrounded by paperwork, phone face down beside him with 3 unanswered texts from Micah glowing faintly through the screen. What thing? The thing where something gets hard. So you disappear into work instead of dealing with it. She sat on the edge of the desk, arms crossed, in full older sister mode. You did it after Mom died. You buried yourself in college applications so you wouldn't have to talk about how sad you were. You're doing it now with Dad's bills so you don't have to talk to Micah about whatever's actually scaring you. The bills are real, Dana. Somebody has to deal with them. Sure. And you could deal with them during business hours, like a normal person, instead of at 11 p.m. while your phone sits there ignoring a guy who kissed you by the river 4 days ago. She softened, seeing something in his face. What are you actually scared of? Eli set down his pen, rubbed a hand over his eyes, too tired to keep performing composure for his sister of all people. What if I let myself want this, really want it, all the way, and then I have to leave anyway? The house sells, or it doesn't, and either way in 10 days I get on a plane. And then what? Long distance with someone I spent 9 years too scared to even call. So talk to him about that. Actually talk, not vanish into spreadsheets. Dana's voice gentled. You're not 17 anymore either, you know. You get to have hard conversations now instead of running from them. That's kind of the whole point of growing up. She was right, and Eli knew she was right. And still it took him 2 more days to actually pick up the phone. 2 days in which Micah's texts grew shorter and more careful. 2 days in which Eli caught himself, more than once, standing at the kitchen window watching Micah's porch light across the yard and not walking over. Telling himself he'd go tomorrow. Telling himself the same lie he'd been telling himself for 9 years, just in smaller doses now. It was Micah who finally forced the issue. Showing up at the door on the 6th evening with his jaw set in a way Eli hadn't seen since they were kids, since the version of Micah who used to brace for his father's temper before it even arrived. We need to talk, Micah said, and Eli's stomach dropped, because those were the same words that had started every important conversation of his adult life, and none of them had gone well. Micah, I'm sorry, the estate's been. I know about the estate. I know your dad's affairs are a mess. I know you're drowning in it. I get it. Micah's voice was tight, controlled in a way that told Eli he'd rehearsed this. But you've had 4 days, Eli, and in 4 days you've given me a note, 3 half-finished text messages, and 1 dinner you spent on the phone with the bank. I'm not asking you to drop everything. I'm asking you to actually let me in, instead of doing the thing you did 9 years ago, just slower this time, so it doesn't feel as obvious. That's not fair, isn't it? Micah's eyes were bright, hurt plainly visible under the frustration. I told you everything, Eli. On that tailgate, I told you the truest, scariest thing I've ever told anyone. And I get it. I do. If you need time, if this is a lot. But don't stand there in your dead father's kitchen and pretend you're not pulling away, because I've watched you do this exact thing before, and I recognize it now. even when you don't. The words hit exactly where they were meant to, precise and unflinching, and Eli felt something in him want to bristle, to defend himself, and beneath that, quieter, the awful recognition that Micah was right. That somewhere in the last week Eli had started building the same careful walls he'd spent years perfecting, just with better excuses this time. I don't know how to do this, Eli admitted, voice cracking on the honesty of it. I don't know how to want something this much and not be terrified of losing it. Micah's expression cracked open too, some of the anger draining out of it, replaced by something more exhausted and more tender. Then tell me that. That's all I've been asking for. Not certainty, not a 5-year plan. Just, don't disappear on me quietly. Not again. If you're scared, say you're scared. I can work with scared. I can't work with silence. They stood there in the kitchen, several feet of tile between them that felt, in that moment, exactly as wide as 9 years, and Eli understood with sudden, aching clarity that this was the actual choice in front of him. Not city versus small town, not job versus this half-formed thing with Micah, but simply whether he was willing to be known, fully and out loud, by someone who had already decided to stay. I'm scared, Eli said, finally, the words rough and unpracticed in his mouth. I'm so scared, Micah. I'm scared I'll ruin this the way I ruin everything I let myself want too much. Something in Micah's shoulders loosened, like he'd been holding his breath for 6 days waiting to hear exactly that. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and pulled Eli into him, arms wrapping around his shoulders, chin resting against his hair. Okay, Micah murmured against him. Okay, that I can work with. Just keep telling me. That's all I need. Don't go quiet on me. Eli held on, feeling something loosen in his own chest that had been wound tight since the phone rang on the counter 6 days earlier, and thought, not for the first time, that maybe the hardest and most important thing he'd ever have to learn was simply this: how to stay out loud, even when staying scared him more than leaving ever had. The days that followed felt different in a way Eli hadn't expected. Not easier, exactly, but more honest, like a window that had finally been cracked open after years of stale air. He started texting Micah through the boring parts of his day, small, unimportant things. A photo of a particularly ugly casserole dish someone had dropped off, a complaint about the county clerk's office hours, nothing that mattered and everything that did, because it meant not disappearing, meant staying visible even in the ordinary moments. Micah, for his part, started showing up in small ways too, bringing coffee in the mornings without being asked, sitting with Eli through an hour of tedious paperwork just to keep him company, teaching him, patiently, how his father's ancient riding mower actually worked so the lawn wouldn't die before the house sold. It was, Eli thought more than once, what he imagined a real relationship might actually look like, stripped of the performance he'd grown so used to in the city. No careful texting schedules, no strategic vulnerability, just 2 people slowly relearning how to need each other. It was good. It was, for 6 days, genuinely good. Then Caleb Hutchins came back into town. Eli didn't think much of it at first, just a name Dana mentioned in passing, an old classmate visiting his parents for a week, someone Eli barely remembered beyond a vague recollection of varsity Letterman jackets and a locker 3 down from his own. It wasn't until the farmer's market on Saturday, Eli and Micah walking side by side with a bag of peaches between them, that the name became a face, and the face became a problem. Micah Reyes. Caleb's voice carried a familiarity that made something in Eli's stomach tighten before he'd even fully processed why. Damn, man, it's been years. Caleb. Micah's smile was polite, a little stiff, the particular careful smile Eli remembered him wearing around people from a part of his past he didn't talk about much. Didn't know you were in town. Just for the week, visiting my folks. Caleb's eyes flicked to Eli, assessing, then back to Micah, and something in his expression shifted into something more pointed. You two still. I mean, are you? He laughed, short and a little uncomfortable. Sorry. Old habits. Forgot you'd finally come out with all that. It's not really a secret anymore. No, Micah said evenly, though Eli caught the tightness around his eyes. Good for you, man. Seriously. Caleb's gaze lingered on Eli a beat too long. You two dating or? We're figuring it out, Micah said, and reached over, without seeming to think about it, and took Eli's hand. It should have felt good. It did feel good, the easy, public claiming of it, Micah's fingers laced through his in the middle of the crowded market without a flicker of hesitation. But something in Caleb's expression as he watched the gesture, some old familiarity in the way he looked at Micah, snagged in Eli's chest and refused to let go. "We should get going," Eli said once Caleb had wandered off, his voice coming out tighter than he meant it to. "Dana's expecting the peaches for the pie." Micah studied him for a second, something knowing in his expression. "You okay?" "Fine." The word again, doing its usual unconvincing work. "Eli, how do you know him?" Eli asked, before he could stop himself, and immediately hated how small it made him sound. Micah's expression softened, understanding dawning. "Caleb? We hooked up a couple times, years ago, before I really had my feet under me about any of this. It wasn't anything. He was passing through, I was lonely and confused. It happened twice, and then never again." He squeezed Eli's hand. "That's genuinely all it was. Are you? Is that what this is about?" Eli felt heat crawl up his neck, embarrassed at how transparent he'd apparently been. "It's stupid." "It's not stupid." Micah stopped walking, turned to face him fully, market noise buzzing around them. "But it is a little bit funny, if I'm honest, that you spent 9 years running from this exact kind of feeling, and now you're standing here jealous over a guy I haven't thought about in 6 years. I'm not jealous." Eli absolutely was jealous, and the flush spreading up his neck gave him away completely. Micah's mouth curved, gentle, not mocking. "Eli, look at me." He waited until Eli did. "There's no one else. There hasn't been anyone else, not really, not in any way that mattered, for a long time before you ever came home. I've been waiting for you, whether I fully admitted that to myself or not." Caleb was a confused 22-year-old fumbling around before I figured out who I actually wanted. That's all he ever was. The honesty of it settled something jittery in Eli's chest, and he felt a little foolish for how quickly the old insecurity had surfaced. 9 years of loneliness apparently leaving deeper marks than he'd realized, ready to flare at the smallest provocation. "I'm sorry," Eli said. "I don't usually do the jealous thing. I think I'm just," he exhaled, searching for the honest version of it. "I think some part of me still can't quite believe this is real. Like I'm waiting for the part where it falls apart, so I'm bracing for it in advance. I know that feeling." Micah reached up, brushed a thumb along Eli's jaw, unbothered by the market crowd moving around them. "But I need you to try to believe it anyway. Not because it's easy, because it's worth the risk." They walked home slower than they needed to, peaches forgotten in the bag between them, hands linked the whole way, and Eli found himself thinking, not for the first time that week, that maybe the real work of loving someone wasn't the grand gesture by the river. It was this, the small, unglamorous labor of choosing honesty over fear, again and again, in ordinary moments that no one would ever put in a story. But the 10 days were closing in fast now, and neither of them had said a word yet about what came after. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, and Eli sat across the desk from a man named Harmon who'd handled his father's affairs for 30 years, signing the last of the estate documents with a hand that had gone slightly numb from the sheer volume of paperwork. It was done. The house was his, free and clear of the mortgage, the debts settled, the last piece of his father's life folded neatly into a manila folder that Eli would carry out to his rental car and never quite know where to put. For days left. He had a flight booked for Tuesday morning, a return to the apartment with no photographs, the job that had called him twice more that week with increasingly urgent voice memos about the client account he'd left dangling. Everything was in order. Everything, except the one thing that actually mattered. He found Micah in his mother's garage that evening, elbow deep in the engine of an old motorcycle he'd apparently been restoring for the better part of a year, grease smudged along his forearm, radio playing low-static Y country from a speaker held together with duct tape. He looked up when Eli's shadow fell across the doorway, and something in his face went carefully still, like he'd been waiting for this conversation and dreading it in equal measure. "Estate's settled," Eli said, because it was easier to start there than anywhere else. "I heard. Dana mentioned it." Micah set down his wrench, wiped his hands on a rag, giving himself something to do with them. "So, Tuesday. The words sat heavy between them. Micah leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed, and for a moment neither of them said anything, the radio filling the silence with a song about leaving that felt almost too on the nose to bear. "I've been thinking about it all week," Micah said finally. trying to figure out what to say that wouldn't sound like I was asking you to give up your whole life for me. Would you be asking that? No. Micah's answer came fast, certain. I would never ask you to do that, Eli. I know what that job means to you. You've built something real there, something that's yours. I'm not going to be the guy who makes you choose between me and everything else you've worked for. That's not love. That's just a different kind of trap. So what then? Eli's voice cracked a little on the question, all the fear of the last 2 weeks finally surfacing at once. We just go back to how it was. 9 more years of missing each other from 300 miles apart. Except now, we actually know what we're missing? God, no. Micah pushed off the workbench, closing the distance between them. I'm not saying that either. I'm saying I don't have it figured out yet, and I'd rather tell you that honestly than hand you some grand romantic plan I haven't actually thought through, just to make this conversation feel easier. Eli let out a breath that was half laugh, half something closer to tears. Okay, that's kind of exactly what I need to hear. I've had enough grand gestures for one summer. Micah's mouth curved, some of the tension easing out of his shoulders. Here's what I do know. He reached out, took both of Eli's hands in his, grease-stained and warm. I know I'm not losing you again without a fight. I know I can work remotely. I've been doing contract engineering for a firm out of Denver for 2 years now. I could do that from anywhere with decent internet, including, apparently, your apartment with no photographs on the walls. If you'd have me there while we figure the rest out. You'd leave here? After everything. After just getting your feet under you with your mom. This town isn't the thing I almost lost twice, Eli. You are. Micah's grip tightened, steady and certain in a way that undid something tight in Eli's chest. I'm not saying it has to be forever, or that we have to decide everything tonight. I'm saying I'd rather be uncertain somewhere with you than certain somewhere without you. I learned that lesson 9 years too late already. I'm not making the same mistake twice. Eli felt something break loose in his chest, the last of the fear he'd been carrying since the phone rang on his father's kitchen counter 2 weeks ago, and in its place something warmer, steadier, entirely unfamiliar, and entirely welcome. I don't want to sell the house, he said, the realization arriving even as he spoke it. I know that's not what Dana thinks I should do, and it's not practical, and I don't fully know what it means yet. But I don't want to sell it. I want somewhere to come back to. He laughed, disbelieving at himself. I want to keep the porch light on. I don't even know exactly what I'm asking for yet, but I know I don't want to lose this place, or you, ever again. So don't, Micah said simply, like it really could be that easy, like 2 people who'd spent 9 years too scared to say the true thing out loud could simply decide, now, to stop being scared. Keep the house. Split your time, if you want to, until we figure out what makes the most sense. I'll come to the city. You'll come home when you can. We'll be terrible at it for a while, probably, because neither of us has ever actually done this before. Not really, not out loud. But we'll figure it out together, the way we should have been figuring things out for 9 years already. Eli looked at him, grease on his forearms, radio playing something soft and unimportant behind him. The same steady patience in his eyes that had been there since they were boys climbing through windows just to keep talking, and felt, for the first time since his father's death, something that wasn't grief or fear or old careful distance. It felt, he thought, a lot like home. Okay, Eli said, and closed the last of the distance between them, standing on his toes to kiss Micah slow and unhurried in the fading light of the garage, grease and gasoline and summer evening air all tangled together into something Eli suspected he'd remember for the rest of his life. Okay, let's figure it out. Together, this time. 3 months later, Eli stood on the same porch where this had all started, watching the last of a September sunset burn orange over the tree line, and found himself thinking about how strange it was that the biggest changes in a life could hinge on something as small as a taxi pulling into a gravel driveway at 10 o'clock at night. The house was different now, though not in any way a stranger would notice. Micah's motorcycle parts had colonized half the garage. There were 2 coffee mugs by the sink instead of 1. And the guest room Eli's father had never quite finished furnishing now held a proper desk where Micah spent his mornings on video calls with the Denver firm, headset on, laughing at something Eli couldn't hear from the kitchen. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of details that, stacked together, quietly became a life. It hadn't been effortless. Eli had gone back to the city for 6 weeks that first stretch, commuting between two lives while they figured out the shape of things. And there had been hard nights on the phone, misunderstandings that took real work to untangle, the particular difficulty of two people learning how to actually communicate after 9 years of practicing the opposite. But they'd kept their promise to each other. No more disappearing quietly. No more 9-year silences dressed up as self-protection. When it got hard, they said so. Out loud. Every time. Eli had, eventually, made the decision that surprised absolutely everyone except Micah. He'd taken the firm up on a remote arrangement of his own, splitting his time between the city and home, until home had quietly, gradually, become simply home, no qualifier needed. "You're doing the thing again," Micah said, coming out onto the porch behind him, 2 beers in hand, settling into the spot beside Eli on the top step that had become, without either of them deciding it consciously, entirely theirs. "What thing?" "Standing out here staring at nothing, looking like you're about to cry over a porch light." Micah bumped his shoulder against Eli's, gentle, teasing. "It's just a light bulb, you know." "It's not just a light bulb." Eli took the beer, let himself lean into Micah's side, watching the yellow glow flicker on above them as the sky finished going dark. "My dad used to leave it on for me. Every night, no matter how late I was out, no matter how much trouble I'd probably gotten into. It meant somebody was waiting. Somebody wanted me to come home." Micah was quiet a moment, understanding settling over his face. "I like that story. I keep it on now. Every night." Eli looked over at him, feeling something warm and unguarded spread through his chest, the kind of feeling he'd spent 9 years too scared to let himself have. "For you, I guess." "Same reason." Micah's smile was soft, a little disbelieving, like some part of him still hadn't fully caught up to the fact that this was real, that the boy he'd loved silently for years had actually, finally, come home to stay. "Eli Carter, if you keep saying things like that, I'm going to have to marry you eventually, just to make you stop being so quietly devastating about it." "Eventually," Eli said, laughing, feeling the words settle somewhere easy and certain in his chest, not scary the way it might have been a few months ago. A promise, not a threat. "I think I could live with that." They sat there a long while as the night deepened around them, porch light burning steady and warm above their heads, the river somewhere beyond the tree line carrying its quiet current toward wherever rivers go. And Eli thought that if 9 years ago someone had told him this was waiting for him, this ordinary, unglamorous, deeply happy life, built slowly out of honesty and second chances, and a boy who'd never stopped waiting, he wouldn't have believed them. He was glad, now, that he hadn't had to know. He was glad he'd simply had to come home and find out. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with Eli and Micah's story. This one meant a lot to tell. If you loved this journey, the fear, the almost losing, the choosing each other anyway, please hit subscribe, drop a like, and let me know in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Was it the river? The garage? The porch light? There's more to this town than one story. Eli's sister Dana has her own history here. And there are people in this town who haven't made their peace with who they are yet, the way Micah once had to. Should I tell you what happens next?